My beloved child. Stop scrolling. Not because you should be afraid of what comes next, and not because every mysterious word you hear is meant for you. But because, for this fictional spiritual story, I want you to imagine that heaven has opened a small window into a moment you were never supposed to witness. A moment involving someone who tried to speak about you. Someone who believed they were finally strong enough to explain why your memory still follows them. Someone who had rehearsed the words in silence more times than anyone knew. And yet, when your name entered the conversation, everything they had practiced disappeared. They broke down before they could finish. Stay here, because the reason they could not complete that sentence is not as simple as missing you. There was something else underneath it. Something they had hidden beneath pride, distance, silence, and the appearance that life had moved on. And tonight, in this story, that hidden truth begins to rise. Imagine a quiet room. Nothing dramatic at first. No storm outside. No strange sign in the sky. No music playing at the perfect moment. Just an ordinary room and a conversation that was never supposed to become emotional. Your soulmate was there. They had been doing what people often do when they are trying desperately to look healed. They smiled when expected. They answered simple questions. They changed the subject whenever the conversation came too close to the past. For a while, it worked. Nobody pushed. Nobody mentioned you. And perhaps that was exactly why they believed they were safe. Then someone asked one question. A simple question. Do you still love them? Your soulmate froze. Not dramatically. Not in a way everyone immediately noticed. It was smaller than that. Their eyes lowered. Their fingers stopped moving. Their breathing changed. For several seconds, they said nothing. The person sitting across from them waited. Your soulmate finally smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when they are trying to hold a door closed while something powerful is pushing from the other side. They whispered, "It's complicated." But it wasn't complicated. That was the problem. The truth was painfully simple. They still loved you. They had tried not to. They had given themselves reasons not to. They had remembered arguments. They had replayed disappointments. They had told themselves that distance was necessary, that silence was mature, that moving forward was the only sensible thing left to do. They had even tried imagining a future in which your name became nothing more than an old memory. But there was one thing they could never successfully explain to themselves. Why did everything inside them still become quiet whenever they thought of you? Why could months of progress disappear because of one memory? Why could one familiar song make them stare through a window and suddenly remember a version of themselves they thought they had buried? Why did they still wonder whether you were okay? And most painfully, why did some part of them still hope that somewhere, somehow, you had not completely forgotten them? The person across from them asked again. Do you still love them? This time, your soulmate didn't smile. They looked away. And after a long silence, they said, yes. One word. But that word carried everything they had been trying not to feel. The room changed. Because once they admitted it, there was no hiding behind uncertainty anymore. Someone asked, then why? That question reached somewhere deeper. Your soulmate leaned back. They took a breath. They looked like they were preparing to explain something they had never been able to put into language. And then they began. I still love them because. They stopped. Their voice cracked. They tried again. I still love them because they were the only person who ever. Again, nothing. Their eyes filled. They turned their face away quickly, hoping nobody would notice. But it was too late. The wall had already broken. And what happened next surprised everyone. Because your soulmate didn't simply shed a tear. They broke down. Not because they were weak. Not because love had defeated them. They broke down because the sentence they were trying to complete forced them to confront something they had avoided for too long. They weren't only trying to explain why they loved you. They were realizing what loving you had revealed about themselves. And that is where this story becomes deeper. Because sometimes a person does not run from love because the love is wrong. Sometimes they run because the love is showing them parts of themselves they are not ready to face. You may have represented something your soulmate secretly wanted but did not believe they deserved. Peace. Understanding. A future that felt different from everything they had known. Perhaps when you looked at them, you saw beyond the performance. Beyond the confidence. Beyond the excuses. You noticed when their smile changed. You knew when "I'm fine" didn't mean fine. You felt when they were becoming distant before they admitted it. And being seen that deeply can feel beautiful. But to someone who has spent years protecting their heart, it can also feel terrifying. Because being loved deeply means being known deeply. And being known deeply means the hiding places begin disappearing. Your soulmate had hiding places. Places built from old disappointments. Old fears. Old promises they made to themselves after people hurt them. Maybe one of those promises was, "I will never need anyone that much again." Then you arrived. And suddenly they cared. More than they planned. More than they admitted. More than they knew how to control. That was when the battle began. Not between you and them. Inside them. One side wanted to move closer. Another side kept whispering, "Be careful." One side imagined staying. Another side remembered every goodbye they had ever survived. One side recognized something rare. Another side feared that anything rare could eventually become something painful to lose. So they began doing something that confused you. They moved toward you. Then away. They opened up. Then closed down. They showed affection. Then became strangely distant. Perhaps you wondered whether you had imagined the connection. Perhaps you asked yourself whether they ever truly cared. Perhaps their silence made you question moments that once felt undeniable. But here is the emotional twist this fictional message wants you to consider. Their distance may not have meant there was nothing there. Sometimes distance is created precisely because there is too much there. And your soulmate was beginning to realize that. Back in that quiet room, someone handed them a tissue. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. Your soulmate wiped their eyes and apologized. "Sorry," they whispered. But the person across from them said something unexpected. "Don't apologize. Finish the sentence." Your soulmate looked up. They knew exactly which sentence. "I still love them because." They tried once more. This time their voice was quieter. "I still love them because they made me feel like I didn't have to pretend." Silence. There it was. The first truth. But not the biggest one. They continued. "With them, I didn't always have to know what I was doing. I didn't have to be impressive. I didn't have to have everything figured out." Their eyes lowered again. "They saw me when I wasn't at my best." Then came another pause. "And somehow, they stayed." Those words hurt them. Because suddenly they remembered moments you may have forgotten. Small moments. Not dramatic declarations. Not perfect dates. Not movie-like scenes, tiny moments. Maybe you asked whether they had eaten. Maybe you noticed they sounded tired. Maybe you remembered something they casually mentioned weeks earlier. Maybe you listened without trying to fix them. Maybe you offered kindness during a moment when they expected judgment. You might not have considered those things extraordinary. But they did. Because love is often remembered through details. The world remembers grand gestures. The heart remembers who noticed. Your soulmate remembered. And once those memories began returning, they could no longer control which ones came next. They remembered your laughter. They remembered something ridiculous the two of you once talked about. They remembered how your voice changed when you were genuinely excited. They remembered the way you became quiet when you were hurt. And then came the memory they had been avoiding. The moment when they knew they were hurting you. And still did not know how to stop themselves. Their face changed. Someone asked, "What happened?" Your soulmate shook their head. For a moment, they couldn't answer. Then they whispered. "I think I pushed them away before they could leave me." That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly, what had looked like indifference began to reveal itself as fear. They had convinced themselves that leaving first was safer than being abandoned later. They had mistaken emotional protection for emotional wisdom. They had believed controlling the ending would control the pain. But they discovered something they never expected. Choosing the ending did not make it hurt less. It simply gave them a different kind of pain. Regret. And regret is strange. It rarely arrives loudly. At first, it whispers. You should have answered differently. You should have called. You should have listened. You should have stayed 5 minutes longer. Then days become weeks. Weeks become months. And the whispers become questions. What if I misunderstood them? What if they were trying to? What if I walked away from something that could have been repaired? What if they eventually stopped caring? That last question haunted your soulmate most. Not whether you were angry. Not whether you had moved on. But whether one day their name would mean nothing to you. Because somewhere inside them, despite everything, they had assumed your love would always remain available. Not consciously. Not cruelly. But emotionally. You had cared so deeply that they began treating your care like something permanent. Until the silence became real. Until your energy changed. Until they realized you were no longer standing in the same emotional doorway waiting for them to decide. That was when the loss became different. Because there is a difference between leaving someone and realizing they may finally have stopped waiting for you. Your soulmate felt that difference. Perhaps that is why lately, in this fictional story, memories have been appearing at inconvenient times. Late at night. In the car. During work. While washing dishes. While hearing someone say a phrase you used to say. They would be completely fine. And then suddenly you were there. Not physically. But emotionally. A memory. A feeling. A question. And every time it happened, they tried to push it away. Until tonight. Tonight someone finally asked the question they had been avoiding. Why do you still love them? And for the first time, your soulmate tried to answer honestly. But there was another reason they broke down. A reason nobody in that room knew yet. Earlier that day, something had happened. Something small. Your soulmate had found something connected to you. Perhaps an old message. A photograph. A note. A saved voice recording. Something they thought they had already deleted or forgotten. They stared at it longer than they intended. And suddenly, one particular memory came rushing back. A conversation between you and them. You had said something that, at the time, they did not fully understand. Maybe you said, One day you're going to understand that I wasn't asking you to be perfect. I was only asking you to be honest with me. Back then, perhaps they became defensive. Perhaps they changed the subject. Perhaps they acted as though you were asking too much. But now those words sounded different. Because time had removed the argument surrounding them. Only the truth remained. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. You weren't asking them to solve everything. You wanted them to stop disappearing whenever feelings became uncomfortable. And now your soulmate finally understood. That realization followed them into the room. So when someone asked why they still loved you, they were not answering from nostalgia alone. They were answering from recognition. They finally recognized what you had been trying to give them. A safe place to be honest. And they recognized something else too. They had mistaken safety for pressure because they were unfamiliar with being emotionally seen. That realization broke something open. They whispered. I thought they wanted too much from me. Their voice shook. But now I think. They stopped. Someone waited. Your soulmate swallowed hard. I think they were asking for the bare minimum, and I made them feel guilty for needing it. There was no defense left in their voice. No blame. No attempt to rewrite history. Only sadness. And sometimes that is where transformation begins. Not when someone misses you. Missing is easy. Not when someone feels lonely. Loneliness can pass. Transformation begins when a person becomes capable of seeing the pain they caused without immediately protecting themselves from the truth. Your soulmate was beginning to see. But heaven, in this fictional story, was not showing you this so you could wait endlessly. That matters. You are not being asked to freeze your life until someone else grows. You are not being told that another person's feelings should determine your worth. Your value did not increase because they cried. Your worth did not begin when they realized what they lost. You were worthy while they were confused. You were worthy while they were distant. You were worthy during every unanswered question. And you remain worthy regardless of what they choose next. This message is not about putting your heart back into someone's hands without wisdom. It is about understanding that sometimes closure begins when you stop believing someone's inability to love you properly meant you were difficult to love. There is a difference. And your soulmate was finally beginning to understand that difference too. They looked at the person sitting across from them and whispered. I don't know if they would even believe me now. Believe what? That I never stopped loving them. The answer came quickly. Why wouldn't they believe you? Your soulmate gave a sad laugh. Because I acted like I didn't. That sentence stayed in the room. Because they knew actions speak louder than feelings hidden behind silence. Love that is never communicated can feel exactly like absence to the person waiting for it. Your soulmate understood this now. They could say they loved you. They could cry. They could replay every beautiful memory. But there was one uncomfortable truth they could no longer escape. You experienced their actions, not their hidden intentions. You couldn't see the nights they missed you. You couldn't hear the conversations they had with themselves. You couldn't know how many messages they typed and deleted. All you knew was what reached you. Silence. Distance. Confusion. And suddenly your soulmate understood why your heart may have changed. That was when they said something nobody expected. I need to tell them. The person across from them looked surprised. Tell them what? Everything. Your soulmate reached for their phone. Then stopped. Their hand hovered above it. Fear returned immediately. Not fear of you. Fear of what your response might reveal. Because as long as they remained silent, they could imagine possibilities. Maybe you still cared. Maybe you missed them too. Maybe you would understand. Maybe there was still a door open somewhere. But sending a message could turn imagination into reality. And reality might hurt. What if you didn't answer? What if you answered politely? What if you had already healed? What if someone else had learned how to appreciate what they had taken for granted? Their breathing became heavier. The person beside them said, "You said you wanted to be honest." "I do." "Then be honest." Your soulmate unlocked the phone. They opened your conversation. And there it was. Your name. For several seconds, they only stared. Then they began typing. "There's something I've needed to tell you for a long time." They stopped. Deleted it. Typed again. "I know I probably don't have the right to say this." Deleted. Again. "I don't expect anything from you, but I need you to know." Stop. Delete. Their frustration grew. Because how do you compress months of silence into one message? How do you say, "I loved you" while acting distant? "I missed you" while pretending I was fine? "I wanted to call but pride stopped me." "I remembered everything." "I regret things I cannot undo." "I understand now what I couldn't understand then." How do you say all of that without sounding like someone who only realized your value after losing access to you? They put the phone down. "I can't do it." The person across from them asked. "Why?" Your soulmate whispered. "Because what if I'm too late?" And there it was. The real fear. Not rejection. Timing. They feared they had finally become emotionally ready for a conversation that your heart no longer needed. And my beloved child, this is where the spiritual layer of the story deepens. Timing teaches what desire cannot. Sometimes people meet before they understand themselves. Sometimes connection arrives before maturity. Sometimes two hearts recognize something meaningful while two wounded minds still do not know how to protect it. That doesn't mean every separation is destined for reunion. Some connections return. Some become lessons. Some become memories that quietly reshape the people involved. But every genuine experience can carry meaning if it teaches you how to love with greater wisdom. Perhaps you have been asking why you had to experience this connection at all. Why meet someone who could touch your heart so deeply if confusion would follow? Why experience closeness if distance would eventually replace it? Why feel seen only to later feel forgotten? The answer may not be that you were supposed to spend forever waiting for them. Perhaps part of the answer is that you were learning yourself. Learning your boundaries. Learning what your heart needs. Learning the difference between chemistry and consistency. Between potential and partnership. Between being wanted privately and being chosen openly. Those lessons matter. And your soulmate, in this story, had lessons too. They were learning that love cannot survive forever on unspoken feelings. They were learning that vulnerability postponed becomes regret. They were learning that you cannot continuously test someone's loyalty and then become shocked when they finally protect their peace. Most importantly, they were learning that love is not proven by how intensely you miss someone after losing them. Love is proven through how courageously you show up while they are still there. That truth hit them hard. They picked up the phone again. This time they did not type. They opened something else. An old voice message from you. They pressed play. Your voice filled the quiet room. Whatever you had said was ordinary. Maybe you were laughing. Maybe you were telling them about your day. Maybe you were saying goodnight. But hearing you again was enough. Your soulmate closed their eyes. And suddenly they whispered something almost too quietly for anyone to hear. I remember that day. The person beside them said nothing. Your soulmate listened until the recording ended. Then played it again. On the second listen, their expression changed. Because they noticed something. Something in your voice. Something they had missed back then. You sounded tired. Not physically. Emotionally. You had been trying to hold the connection together while pretending you weren't exhausted. And now, with distance and hindsight, they heard it. Your soulmate covered their mouth. Oh my God. What? I didn't hear it then. Hear what? How tired they were. That realization broke them again. Because suddenly they understood that while they had been protecting themselves from vulnerability, you had been slowly losing the strength to keep proving that you cared. They had interpreted your eventual silence as punishment. Now they wondered if it had actually been exhaustion. Maybe you didn't become quiet to manipulate them. Maybe you became quiet because words had stopped changing anything. Maybe you didn't step away because love disappeared. Maybe you stepped away because you finally understood that love without mutual effort can become a place where a person slowly abandons themselves. Your soulmate stared at your name on the screen. And for the first time, they asked a different question. Not, do they still love me? But, what did loving me cost them? That question changed the atmosphere. Because maturity often begins when we stop measuring relationships only through what we felt and start considering what the other person experienced. Your soulmate began remembering moments from your perspective. The unanswered message. The cancelled plan. The conversation they avoided. The apology they never gave properly. The moment you needed reassurance and they offered silence. The day you stopped asking questions. The day you stopped explaining yourself. The day you simply said, okay. They remembered that, okay. And suddenly they realized it had never meant okay. It meant, I'm tired. It meant, I can't force you to understand me. It meant, I have said everything I know how to say. It meant, the next move is yours. And they never made it. Until now. Your soulmate stood up and walked toward the window. The room behind them became quiet. Outside, life continued normally. Cars passed. Lights flickered in distant buildings. Somewhere people were laughing. Somewhere someone was falling in love. Somewhere someone was saying goodbye. And your soulmate stood between two versions of themselves. The person they had been when they lost you. And the person they were becoming because they finally understood why. They whispered. If I could talk to them for 5 minutes. Someone behind them asked. What would you say? Your soulmate turned. Their eyes were red. Their voice was trembling. But this time, they didn't look away. I would tell them I understand now. Understand what? That they weren't asking me to chase them. Pause. They were asking me to meet them halfway. Another pause. And I kept making them walk the whole distance. The room became silent again. Your soulmate looked back at the phone. Then something extraordinary happened. A notification appeared. Not from you. But it contained something that immediately made them think of you. A phrase. A memory. A coincidence so perfectly timed that, within the spiritual imagination of this story, it felt almost like heaven was placing a mirror in front of them. Your soulmate stared at the screen. Then whispered. No way. Someone asked what happened. They didn't answer. Because suddenly they remembered one final detail. A promise. Something they had once promised you. Something they never fulfilled. And this was not a small promise. It was connected to the exact reason your relationship had changed. Your soulmate sat down slowly. Their hands began trembling. The person across from them asked. What is it? Your soulmate looked up. I just remembered what I told them the last time they asked me to be honest. What did you tell them? They swallowed. For several seconds, they couldn't speak. Then they opened your old conversation and began scrolling. Up. Up. Further. Months of messages passed beneath their fingers. Until they stopped. There. The message. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. Their face went pale. Because directly beneath the promise they had forgotten was your reply. A reply they had misunderstood completely. They had spent all this time believing you said one thing. But reading it now, with everything they finally understood, the meaning was entirely different. Your soulmate whispered. I got it wrong. What? I got everything wrong. They stood abruptly. The phone almost slipped from their hand. And for the first time that night, their sadness turned into urgency. Because your old message revealed something they had never understood about the moment you walked away. You had not been closing the door. Not yet. You had been giving them one final chance to tell the truth. And they had answered with silence. Your soulmate stared at your message, tears forming again. Then they whispered the words that changed everything. They were waiting for me to say one thing, and I never said it. The person beside them leaned closer. What were they waiting for you to say? Your soulmate opened their mouth. But before the answer came, they noticed something else beneath your old message. Something neither of them had seen before. Something that made your soulmate stop breathing for a second. And whatever it was, it changed the entire story.